When I was young, like many 90s children, I had an obsession with Pokemon. It first started with my obsession with the video game. I didn't even have it yet. I just saw the few lucky kids playing it on the schoolyard and I was instantly hooked. I watched the show every Saturday morning and I got the Pokemon cards. I even read the light novels. A few months later, it was my 7th birthday and my entire family was huddled around the dining room table. After the excessive amount of cake and ice cream, I was handed a present from my aunt. It wasn't very big, but it sure was a dense feeling box. I eagerly unwrapped the box to find a purple Game Boy Color and a copy of Pokemon Red. I felt like I was going to explode from the excitement. I swiftly opened up the packaging and slid the crisp, new cartridge into the back of the Game Boy. That classic Game Boy ding echoed in my ears and the iconic start-up screen was playing. As I watched, my mother politely nagged at me, "Honey, you have one last present for me." I reluctantly averted my gaze from the screen to see her expectantly holding up an oddly shaped item. I opened it with one hand and slowly revealed the yellow cloth underneath. It was a Pikachu doll. Once again, my eyes lit up as I finally had someone to share my video game with. I had no siblings or friends to share these experiences with. My parents had absolutely no interest in such things, so Pikachu would become my best friend. Instantly I knew I would name him Sparky, after a Pikachu from the show. I slept with him and played Pokemon Red with him. I would watch the show with him and when I went to school I would hide him in my backpack. This went on for many years as I slowly accumulated more and more Pokemon merchandise, more games, more books, more cards, everything except dolls. Nothing could replace Sparky. But like a lot of my items, I lost him. I lost Sparky. I looked everywhere, but I couldn't find him. I lost my Game Boy for almost a year, only to find it underneath the couch cushion once, so losing things wasn't new to me. For weeks I was heartbroken, but I moved on. Then I came home one day to find a rough, dirty Pikachu doll on the kitchen island. I asked my dad where it came from and he said he found it at work. He worked at a scrapyard and he saw this Pikachu in the back of a car that was about to be crushed. I picked up the Pikachu with a slight grimace, trying not to touch the soiled spots all over it. I looked at the tag on his foot to see the name, Sparky, scribbled with red ink. I found the red ink bizarre, but I assumed it was to make it stand out from the black lettered label. It was a well-known nickname for Pikachu, so I wasn't all too surprised. Its tail was torn and the seams started to show the potential of tearing soon. But otherwise it was in average condition I suppose for a 13-year-old doll. "What a grotesque little Pikachu you are," I muttered slightly aloud. As I gazed into its soulless eyes I began to feel trapped. I continued peering further and further into the abyss, for no apparent reason. They were the only unsoiled part of this Pikachu. They were jet black, yet they released no reflection. It was such a bizarre feeling. It must be some weird coating they put on them. "Hey, so you did take a liking to the little guy," my father said abruptly, startling me immensely. Gasping, I dropped the Pikachu harshly to the floor. I hastily picked them up and set Sparky back onto the island. "Yeah, it reminds me of the one I used to have. I still have to wash it a bit, but after that I hope it should look almost as good as old Sparky. Do you have any idea where he went?" "Haven't a clue. That was your mother's department and she probably remembers less now than she did then. We searched the entire house, remember? Must be at your old school or something." The dull bitterness of the loss returned to me slightly, but only fleetingly as I returned my eyes to the new Sparky. I ambled off to ask my mother what would be the best way to clean this thing. I found her knitting in her bedroom when she returns a slightly odd look at Sparky and I. "Hey, what would be the best way to clean this thing?" "Probably just detergent and water. But I don't know why you would bother cleaning that ratty, old thing." Her curtness bothered me, but I learned not to bother pressing her for information when she's purposefully ambiguous. I just walk away to the laundry room thinking along the way about Pokemon-related things. After a few minutes of vigorously scrubbing every inch of Sparky, I finally cleaned him up. Only a faint spot remained on the underside of its tail. I set him atop the washing machine and headed to my friend's house, which I was late for because of Sparky. Luckily, my friend only lived a few houses down from mine. Although my friend was a bit off-put by my latency, we still had fun playing random N64 games. We spent most of the time playing Pokemon Stadium, to which we would randomly defeat one another in battles and minigames. This went on for hours until I decided to return home. I had school the next day, so it was prudent to swiftly head to bed after getting home. I suddenly remembered the comforting feelings of sleeping with my old Pikachu doll, so I went to obtain Sparky from the laundry room, but to no avail. It wasn't anywhere inside that room. I thoroughly searched for it and gave up to go to sleep, only to find that Sparky was already on my bed. I wish Mom wouldn't touch my stuff, I thought to myself as I drifted slowly in sleep. With the soft fabric of Sparky resting gently within my arms and the faint smell of soap floating softly upon the cold, night air, I abruptly sprung up from my slumber when I awoke that morning. I quizzically looked around my room as I tried to decipher why I was so startled. I couldn't remember any dreams or startling stimuli. As I repeatedly scanned the room, I noticed Sparky sitting upright across the room under my desk. What are the odds of that? I mutter aloud, that he'd land like that when I tossed him when I awoke. At least I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Anyways, it was time for me to be getting ready for school, so I hurriedly tossed on my clothes, slightly wrinkled from lying on the floor, and headed to the washroom. Morning ablutions and breakfast proceeded next, with the only break in my routine being that I returned to my room to secretly stash Pikachu in my backpack. School felt so much more nostalgic with this Pikachu in my backpack. While everyone else had abandoned their Game Boys and Pokemon, I had cherished them all along. As I approached my locker, I realized that I was going to have to awkwardly pull Pikachu out of my backpack so that I could access my binders and textbooks. While I loved Pokemon, I was not comfortable about other people knowing about it. Whenever anything even remotely related to the subject I would feign disinterest or having no memory of it, a little piece of me would always feel disgusted by hiding it. I opened my locker door to shield half of the hallway from the sight of my Pikachu, but the hallway leading to the entrance was still open and crowded as ever. I tried tipping my backpack towards into my locker and sliding Sparky out, but had no success. I decided to just give up the facade and be as swift about it as possible. I reached in, firmly grabbing hold of Sparky's plush head, and yanked him out into the locker. I peered to my left to double-check that no one saw when I noticed two husky fellows in baggy pants and bulky sweaters shuffled towards me. "Hey, what was that doll you just had there?" they asked intimidatingly. As they drew nearer, their shadows and greasy stench cast over me. "Was that a Pikachu?" the shorter one asks, now leaning up against the locker adjacent to mine. I quickly and nervously rebutted, "And no, it was just an art project for, well, art obviously." I stared at them nervously, gauging their reactions, trying to predict the odds of them believing me were. They still seemed interested. One of them pushed me to the right, slamming my locker door open and the other pawing into my locker. As I scrambled back to my feet, as I felt a sense of slight horror as a flash of yellow proceeded from my locker. Their eyes nearly exploded as they both saw it too. I knew it. It was a fucking Pikachu. "What a fag," the taller one exclaimed. "Let's see what the fag does when we throw Pikachu into the garbage, where he belongs," the shorter one responded as they both motioned towards the beige garbage bin hanging from the nearby wall. I rushed towards it, in too late of fashion, as Pikachu is shoved carelessly into its vile opening. They walked away laughing, muttering degrading, generic remarks towards Sparky and I. I sourly removed the lid of the garbage bin and plucked Pikachu out of it. The faint smell of refuse disappeared as I hastily returned it to my locker. Fucking greasers. I hate them all. I hate everyone at this school. My voice trailed off as I realized the daunting preceding thoughts. Luckily, I was close to invisible at the school, so no one else in the hallway seemed to notice my Pikachu or the rest of the incident. I sniffed Pikachu one last time before retrieving my school supplies and locking the door, hiding Sparky from this cruel world. The rest of the day was uneventful, like most school days. I'd be the first to arrive at my classes because I had no one to talk to during the short, 5-minute breaks between classes. I'd sit at the back of every class, paying attention and diligently trying to complete as much work as possible because I absolutely abhorred the idea of homework. During the breaks I did grant myself the luxury of seeing Sparky, cuddled up with my gym shoes at the bottom of my locker. You've never felt nostalgia like that before, I can assure you. After a monotonous day of school, I eagerly return home with Pikachu secretly waiting in my back. I pulled him out as soon as the bus chugged down the street to a distance far enough that the passengers would no longer be able to distinguish Sparky as I walked down my long, barren driveway. I bet you couldn't wait to get out of there, could you? I hope you're better from earlier. Don't worry, Sparky, people like that always get what they deserve, be it from justice or vengeance. I tried to reassure myself more so than Sparky. I set my things sloppily on the front bench and approached my room. Those 45 minutes that I could enjoy alone before my siblings arrived home from their school were my most cherished moments of my day. I had an insatiable desire to play Pokemon Yellow. I even had Pokemon Stadium hooked up to my TV, so I could play it on a bigger screen with acceleration for grinding. A year after I had acquired Red, I had acquired Yellow when it was released. It remains my favorite Pokemon game to this day. How could it not, with Pikachu being the starter? I then enjoyed some Pokemon Yellow with Pikachu at my side, playing for what turned out to be hours. The only reason I stopped was because my mother called me to dinner in her shrill voice that can pierce even the deafest of ears. The rest of the night followed the same path, where I played more Yellow until I grew tired enough to sleep. Once again I was accompanied to bed with Sparky. This time I set him at the foot of my bed though because of the faint smell of garbage. The next morning I woke up much more calmly, but still had no recollection of any dreams. It was odd because I could always remember my dreams no matter how faint or insignificant they were. I glanced to my feet to see it empty there, where Sparky should have been. Instead, I saw him under my desk again upright. What a coincidence you should happen to fall out of my bed and land upright 2 nights in a row. Sparky, I once again mumbled out loud to an inanimate object. I slithered out of bed and retrieved Sparky into my grasp. I almost recoiled when I felt a damp spot on Sparky's right leg. It was another stain very similar to the ones it had before. Whoa. How did I miss a garbage stain from yesterday? I'm sorry little buddy, I'll try to clean it up after school today. Learning from my mistakes I decided to leave Sparky at home, perched on top of my desk. I arrived at school to see the shorter bully from the day prior shuffling about alone. I heard a group of students clamor amongst the din of the school in front of the entrance. I tuned it out until I heard the word Pokemon mentioned and I stopped momentarily to listen. I hear them all spewing ignorant remarks. Yeah, Pokemon was just another one of those shitty fads all those losers had back in elementary school. One, by the name of Chris Fallon, said. Another interrupted. Totally, if you're gonna play video games you should be playing games like COD and Battlefield or something. All this ignorance. I can't take this. I fucking hate everyone at this school. I wish people like Chris Fallon would all die. I wanted to shout, but thought instead. I stood over the stupidity that was teenagers' opinions for most of the day. I waited for school to end so that I wouldn't have to spend another moment within earshot of such words being spoken again for at least that day. I arrived home and rushed to my room to retreat to the realm of video games. I picked up Sparky from off of my desk chair and set him beside me. Looking over at him, I noticed another spot on his left paw. I hadn't realized he had gotten so stained from inside that garbage bin. I also forgot to clean him when I got home, so I erected myself and cleaned Sparky in the laundry room again. Using the same techniques as before, I removed all the spots until they vanished. Then, back to Pokemon Yellow. I had already beaten half the game doing a solo run with my Pikachu in the game, which was aptly nicknamed Sparky of course. Once I beat Brock with Pikachu, which took a profuse amount of time, the game became fairly easy, like most solo runs. While playing I started talking to Sparky beside me. I decided to try telling him about my day, since I had no one else to say it to. I proceeded to tell him about Chris Fallon and my teachers and my hatred of the other students of the school. I spoke about more and more inane things as the time passed on, until my mother burst in the door with a stack of my clothing, teetering violently within her trembling arms. She begun to speak. "Here's your clothes, honey, you really should try go outside, the weather's so lovely and you're just wasting away in here." She seems to be glaring at Sparky when saying that, but it could have just been her avoidance of eye contact. "Anyways, would you like to clean your pickaxe there? I noticed it was getting dirty this morning." How did she know he was dirty this morning? I thought, my eyes still fixated on the glaring TV screen. Was that why he fell onto the chair today? I then replied, "No, I already cleaned him. You know I don't like people touching my things." With that she frowned and somberly exited out the door. "I wish she'd close the damn door," I said, mumbled to myself. She left the door open, which forced me to get up and close it. I stumbled towards it and nudged it closed with my foot. Turning around I see Sparky sitting there with another stain on his stomach. My mother shrieks from down the hall. I swiftly spun around and threw the door open. I nearly skated upon the smooth hardwood floor as I headed down the hall to the stairway. As I passed the stairway to my left, I saw my mother lying upon the bottom of the stairs with a contorted body like a crumpled piece of paper. I carefully traversed the steps down to her side, but her neck was bent strangely and I couldn't hear any sounds from her. I quickly realized that I wouldn't be able to save her. My father had now entered the room briefly, to which we exchanged panicked glances. He realized he had to call an ambulance. As I tried my best to care for my mother, I gently cradled her without moving her, for I remembered that you should not move people with spinal cord injuries. My vision blurred from the tears and I could feel her heat dissipate until the ambulance came. I was shoved aside as they solemnly strapped her to a gurney and taxied her off to the hospital. They declared her dead at the scene. The rest of the night was blurred together amongst the tears and emotions. My father and I were asked some questions about the event, but it was apparent that there was no foul play. I returned to school days later. I couldn't do anything for days. Curled up on my bed with Sparky, he kept getting spots on him, but perhaps this time they were my tears which stained him. I arrived at school as anonymously as ever, no one wiser to my mother's death. I felt slightly relaxed by that. I don't think I could have survived the awkward conversations that would have transpired if they spent too much on me. I walked into the school to see a group of people huddled, wearing mournful faces and black. I shuffled through the crowd to see the glow of candlelight and picture frames on a table. It was a shrine in the foyer. The pictures were of students. The only one I recognized was of Chris Fallon. Confused, I asked a bystander about it. Hey, what happened? He quickly mumbled the words, "Chris Fallon and a group of his friends died 2 days ago." His transparent, stoic face told me that I shouldn't ask him anything more about it, so that's why no one noticed about my mother's death. Or perhaps nobody cared about it. I clenched my teeth in anger. How could those vapid teenagers mean more to people than my caring mother? I felt jealous rage like no other that day. Correct or not, I wanted those children to suffer. These fucking teenagers. Rage consumed my thoughts that I couldn't think clearly. I stewed in my hidden rage that day. I walked like a rigid statue and glared, but everyone was too consumed by their tragic loss to notice once again. Perhaps I was egotistical, perhaps I should have been sad about the children's deaths as well, but that's all in the past now. When I returned, my father was still unapproachable. He was crushed more than I was, so instead I just confided in Sparky once again, so the kids at school don't care about my mother. My voice trailed off once again. I didn't know what words I was going to speak next. Or perhaps I knew the words that I was going to speak, but was too afraid to say them. I felt like Sparky understood very clearly what I wanted. I had grown to despise everyone in the world. All I needed was Sparky to be happy. The next morning I depleted the entire bottle of laundry soap to clean the stains off of Sparky. Post views, 5,628. Please wait. Dreams dreams are a weird thing, but they can be even weirder when something or someone takes them over. Everything seems so normal, but then it all starts. At first it's subtle, a strange man in a strange black robe, with a face empty of eyes, just empty sockets that seem to go on forever. He appears in your dream, but only for a brief moment. You dismiss it as just a weird dream. But then it happens more and more, and you swear you can see him out of the corner of your eye. Even when you are awake, he starts to haunt your thoughts day after day. It gets to the point where you don't even want to sleep anymore. You try to stay awake, try to keep your eyes open, but you can't. You start to doze off, but every time you do, you see an image of blood, a lot of blood. You try even harder to stay conscious, but you can't. You slip into a deep sleep, and have a dream worse than all the rest. It feels so real, but you can't really see anything, just darkness. You can smell burning rubber, and hear a high-pitched screech, and your body is racked with excruciating pain. Your eyes shoot open as you sit up, sweat dripping down your cold face. You look around in a panic, from your desk, to your window, to the corner, then to the door. But then you freeze. Slowly you turn back to the corner. You can feel the shivers go down your spine as you start to make out the figure. It's him, the one who has been haunting your every waking and sleeping moment, but this time you know he is there. You can see the light from the window highlight his black robes, and you can see the endless holes where his eyes would be. Instinct takes control. Before you can think clearly, you are leaping for your keys and rushing through the door. You are almost there. But on your way you crash into the sharp corner of the coffee table, but the adrenaline coursing through your body masks the pain. You dash to your car and through the door open and get in. As fast as you can manage you stick the keys in the ignition and start the car. As soon as you get your car running, you slam your foot on the brake, getting out as fast as you can. You don't know where you're going, but you don't really care, as long as you get away from whatever he is. You are speeding down the road, constantly checking your rearview mirror, making sure he isn't behind you. Just when you start to feel safe, that you lost him, you look in the mirror one last time. But this time, you see something move. You try to look closer, but then something in front of you catches your eye. You swerve trying to avoid it, as a high-pitched sound fills your ears, and then everything goes black just as the smell of burning rubber hits your nose. You open your eye. You feel weird. You expect to feel pain, but you feel nothing. As you sit up you notice that there is an unsettling silence around you. You look about your surrounding, and something catches your eye once again. You see a car crashed into a tree, tire marks down the road. As you study the scene more, a little bit bewildered, you see something that makes you completely freeze. You see your own body, lying in a crumpled position in a pool of your own blood. You look into your own cold dead eyes, not able to completely process what you are seeing. You feel a cold hand gently touch your shoulder, but you don't turn around to see who it is, because you already know. They call him the Dream, and he is building up his army, and he need more recruits. Watch your back, because you may just end up his newest member. When I was a kid, I would spend my free time looking at my mother's tarot cards. I could spend hours and hours just looking at the lively colored figures. They were all so enticingly beautiful that I couldn't stop myself from wanting to hold them in my hands. My mom had painted the cards herself, and as such they were unique, a one-of-a-kind set, which just increased my nearly obsessive fascination. I loved them all, however one card stood above all the others. A woman, sitting on a golden throne with long flowing blonde hair and robes of vivid red that fell around her feet and into the green grass. Below the name of the card was written in graceful letters, "The Empress." My mother once told me she had used herself as a model for that particular card, and the resemblance to her and myself may very well have been the reason behind my favoritism. I spent half of my childhood looking at that card, and whenever I tried to imitate my mother and read my future, somehow, the Empress was always there. No matter how many times I shuffled the deck, my favorite card never ceased to appear. Everything changed when my mother died, though. It was my birthday and I had gone out with my friends. I returned home, stumbling in a drunken haze, only to find my mother's corpse covered in blood on the carpet. A suicide, they said. It had been hard to believe that my mother would do something like that, still I eventually moved on and never touched the tarot deck again. Looking at the cards just reminded me too much of her. Now years have passed, I graduated from med school and a while ago I decided to return to my childhood home, the same place where I found my mother's dead body. It was all just like the day I left, which meant my dad was taking care of it. Making a mental note to talk to him later, I walked into the kitchen. To my disbelief, the first thing I saw was the tarot deck resting in the round wooden table where I spent countless summer afternoons playing with those same cards. Odd. They should be in the closet. I said to myself, Dad must have put them there. On an impulse I sat and opened the cardboard box, quickly freeing the cards from their prison and running my fingers through the golden drawings in the back. Carefully I turned them around and melancholically gazed at the familiar figures. Eventually, when I got to the last card, I came face to face with my mother. Never before had I noticed the striking resemblance the card had with her, maybe because the figure portrayed was a much younger version of what I had known, yet now I could see it clearly. The same long eyelashes and high cheekbones and of course the long golden curls so unlike my brown ones. I looked at the face, drinking in its beauty, until suddenly it changed. In a second the serene features contorted into an angry scowl and I immediately dropped the cards. Nevertheless, the Empress still had her eyes locked on me, her expression showing undeniable fury and wrath. "Come to me." The sweet sound of what resembled my dead mother's voice echoed through the room. I didn't think, I simply extended my hand and slowly touched the card. As soon as my finger made contact with the rough surface of my once favorite tarot card, my surroundings changed. My vision went white and all I could feel was pain. It was as if the blood in my veins had been replaced with pure fire. My entire body burned with agony and suffering. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the pain subsided and my world came into focus again, only it wasn't the same as before. All around me a plain field of emerald extended into the horizon and behind me a golden throne stood majestically on the grass. The strangest thing though was the rectangle that appeared to be floating in front of me, like a mirror hanging from the air itself. In it I could see myself, only it wasn't really me. The face was much bigger than it should and it was literally looking down on me with a wicked grin. Free at last. I heard my own voice saying, but the words were blurry as if I was hearing them from underwater. "Goodbye my sweet child." I tried to say something, to scream and shout, but I found that my voice didn't work and while my lips moved no sound came out. Abruptly I noticed that my face had vanished from the rectangle and all that was left was empty blackness. I was completely alone in the endless field of grass and there was nothing I could do. Looking down I realized that I no longer wore my blue jeans, instead I was dressed in red robes and my hair was now the color of gold, just like I wished for so many years ago. "My sweet child," I mused, "that's what Mother used to call me." I don't know what I'm doing. Sight. My shadows dance from my front to my side then back again, as the speeding car's headlights and the street lamps cast uneven figures on the sidewalk I have been on for about an hour or so. The lights come in white and yellow to vaguely orange, but I have a limited color palette. Just as my shirt is red. Just as the sky tonight is just black. I enjoyed my physics lesson today, but its late dismissal joined with its late schedule. It's 5:30 to 7 p.m., the latest schedule a third-year student can enroll in. It made me miss my last bus ride home. Now here I am, unable to fetch a taxi on a highway beside a wall of graffiti and murals of very happy students looking away and very sad faces looking at you. There are some holes here and there, but the art was enough to veer you away from the textural flaws of the wall. And now I am on my first time walking home. It's just a straight stretch in the road, I thought. I don't think someone can mug me in a well-lit place even at night. Someone will stop driving to help me, I thought. Touch. It's unusually chilly tonight. I have my smooth, cottony jacket with me with my backpack firmly between it and my back for security purposes. I have my handkerchief on its right pocket as both of my hands are fit snugly inside. My hands and face feel oddly damp. I'm not sure if it's the moisture, I'm not sure if it's sweat. I'm just sure that it's on me. Just there. Peering. As of what I understood from my physics professor, this undulating noise from the cars is because of the Doppler effect. The closer the object is to you, the louder you can hear it. Their engines all sound the same to me. Just like that red cars. Just like that black cars. I heard a news today about the increasing number of unregistered art along these walls I am traversing by. It said that famous works of certain graduates from this university of mine made most of these murals, all of which tell the world how diverse and open we are. I can almost hear the paint as it was spread along these walls. The sound of that red guided by the brush of a woman who wanted to show flames of passion. The sound of that black that is expressed as a spider with the face of a very sad human. It hit me that the free gallery of murals from the entrance up to now is starting to become wild. Signs of graffiti like political discontent to declarations of love to not staring at the wall began to show. Rogart-like caricatures of discontented individuals rose from mere words were now talking to me. Sometimes they were narrating as if they were storytellers. Sometimes they were just in labored breathing, as if they were sick. Oust this guy for robbing my life away from me. We are the people they say they are listening to. We are actually the people they are leeching from. Rico loves Mary but she doesn't love him back. He's following someone for a while now and the latter doesn't know. These seemingly random stories were giving me a sense of thrill. I didn't like that I feel a bit of discomfort that they are talking to me, but in a way it distracted me from everything else. Smell. Some objects like garbage bins were in the way of some murals. Some smelled of rancid urine. Some were probably just abandoned kiosks with faint smells of barbecue, hot dogs and calamari. Some isolated bags smelled fishy. Some grassy areas smelled like rotten food. From then I knew this wall had something special in it. All these people inside in a dichotomy of emotions. No one was angry. No one was disgusted. No one was shocked. It's just happy and sad. I couldn't even count them all but the happy ones were of different art styles, probably different artists. I realized that it's just the third time I saw a sad painting on the wall, and it was the same face. The three were probably of the same artist, the same frown. The same droopy eyelids. The same stare. Then it dawned on me that my shadows didn't dance as much as it used to. That only the street lamps were the source of light, that there were no more cars. That it was just me and the wall. My heart skipped a beat and it felt like my shirt was glued to my back. I walked a bit faster as I scanned the highway. There was no sign of any car near. Only scraps of garbage strewn around but not enough to call it messy. I looked back and saw just a stretch of darkness with a few lamps in between, enough to light everything else except the darkness behind the trees, around the corners of the and through the overpasses and on some uneven flaws on the wall. It suddenly felt like it was a one-sided conversation. The murals have been talking and talking and talking since God knows when. My clock stopped at 3:09 but I could have sworn I was checking it before I left and that it was working. I suddenly felt tired and removed my eyes from the sad face on the wall. It felt like it wasn't sad for himself. It was sad for me. It made me realize just now what a shitty life I have. And not just because I missed a bus. Not because I can't fetch a cab. Not because I've been walking for a long time. It's because I was alone. Taste. I reached for the yellow juice drink on the bottle pocket of my bag which was hidden between my back and my jacket. It made me look like a hunchback, I thought. Like I was carrying the weight of something I didn't want. Something that was just dumped on me. I twisted the cap as I sat on the sidewalk in a temporary surrender, sad and tired. My breathing was heavy and labored. I could feel blood rushing on my temples. I felt a bit sweaty, but I didn't move my jacket an inch. The taste started from cool and lemony to a bit metallic. I looked at it but I couldn't find metallic objects nor blood inside. I had everything to hide, and this jacket made sure of it. The sound of my breathing started to move away from my immediate surroundings but I was still tired no less. I looked at my stagnant shadow. It started to look like it wanted someone new to follow, as if it was bored with me. I stood up and began to walk again as the shadow left me. I looked back again at the mural and it began talking again, in and out of politics and personal rants. Our university is the best, it's just this and the others. My girlfriend is what everyone sees. I see a room with a light bulb. The requirements are hard but the achievement is the ultimate. She was a sick girl. People are dying in hunger. We want change and we want it now. Your dad is still there only because of marriage. Stop staring at me. And while it happened, I could hear the labored breathing again. And like the Doppler effect it started to go louder, but now I was sure it wasn't me increasingly getting tired. Now it's as loud as ever and I could see the sad face again, making me feel it's being condescending, and as the wall spanned like it was a whole city, I could only see the face changing ever so slightly from sheer sadness to anxiety to antagonism to interest to exhilaration until that grin was so huge that it stopped there. And it stopped but there was a hand that started to rise up onto its frame. And the hand showed very long fingers painted as if it was coming out of its frame. It looked real and it had very sharp nails. Then I couldn't see him anymore. It was just a blank wall. There were a few squiggles here and there that didn't speak to me at all. I looked closer into a blank frame. Slowly, my damp hands ran its fingers along the edges of the frame. The frames were holes all along. And now I painted it red. I shoved the loose strands of wet hair back into my jacket's pockets. I licked my lips and found the same metallic taste from the drink. I used my jacket's arm to wipe the blood from my eyes. I was muttering no and I was shaky as the bloody hair that wasn't mine was spread all over my face. I couldn't take it anymore. The hands I had weren't mine anymore. It took off my jacket and removed the man's head from my back. I tugged too hard at the scalp, it seems. And now I could fit his head on this empty frame. I found myself muttering no one will hurt you without being exposed, Mary, humming something I've never heard before. Everything else felt automatic as the mossy, forgotten wall was adorned by another mural. I adjusted his frown and those droopy eyelids. I made sure everything was sculpted well. I pulled the mirror out of my bag and caressed my face that only had a smile on it. I couldn't see myself. Mary, I said. I hope you can love me now. I set my mirror so that I can see behind me. I could see cars on the highway. I turned around and saw the university wall behind me. We are all plagiarists and thieves, I thought. But I could see myself with this. Diary of Daniel Chester, Mayor of Snakes Rock City, June 27, 1866. Upon my election to this position, I was under no illusion that it was a place of greatness. As the only man in town over 21 with the proper education, I did not even have an opponent. I was reminded of this today, when Judd Gray came into my office, gun in hand, demanding I order the arrest of Adam Sal. Every week one or the other of them comes to me demanding the arrest of the other for some heinous illegal action. After last time I told Sheriff Tate to handle this himself in the future, but Judd apparently pulled his gun and demanded to speak with me. The situation was settled, of course. The only thing accomplished by Judd was his own arrest. I am certain we will just let him go in the morning though. That is how we keep the balance of peace in this town. There is a reason folks out east call us the Wild West. Days like this earn us the title. An eastbound letter requesting a new shipment of whiskey for Snakes Rock City, June 28, 1866. Dear Luke, it is the time of year again. I will soon be sending a man to you with payment for the usual amount of drink. Nothing out of the usual, as is your preference. Can you believe my talking? I'm having Miss Betsy the school marm write this letter for me, and she keeps changing the words as I say them. I cannot understand my own self the way she writes. At least she spells words better than I could, and look at her pretty handwriting, that made her cheeks turn pink. Enough foolishness though. How have you been, Luke? Any stories to tell me? I have a mighty strange one to tell you. Today, a stranger rode into town, just as the hired hands from the cattle ranches sat down for drinks. He came into my bar, and what did he do? Why, he ordered another round, on him. I obliged, because he showed his purse to me as proof he could pay the tab. We are wary of strangers in this little town, But as soon as he started talking to the men, he became everyone's old friend. He had the same effect on me. It was something about his eyes that just made me trust him. It is odd now that I think about it. I suppose he will have no trouble fitting in around Snake's Rock if he decides to stay, but I do not know what plans or business he has here. Until I write again, old friend. Tom. A letter from Betsy to her sister in Missouri, June 28, 1866. Dear Susan, my dearest little sister, how have you been? I enjoyed your last letter to me and am overjoyed to hear your health has improved. In answer to your question, no, I have not met a gentleman. The only man with a comparable education to mine is our Mayor Chester, who of course married years ago. I will gladly wait, however, since I do not intend to settle for a man who knows nothing of poetry. At least as this town's school marm I can ensure the next generation of young men has a knowledge of the classics. Just today I wrote a letter for our saloon owner Tom. I know your strict opinion of strong drink, but I must say it is difficult to retain such a code when you live in a town that practically inhales whiskey. He mentioned a stranger who rode into town today. This peculiar man instantly befriended the ranchers, no small feat mind you, and has been in the saloon ever since. Out my window I can hear the men there. I do not know how the stranger convinced them to not return to work, but they remain to hear him speak. If only my pupils listened to me as intently. I wish I had some way to know what he is saying to them. Something is brooding in Snake's Rock City. I hope it is something positive. Warmest regards, Betsy. Diary of Daniel Chester, Mayor of Snake's Rock City, June 29, 1866. Judd Gray returned to my office this morning, meek as a church mouse, and with a new complaint. Not the usual feud with Mr. Sal, but this time about a stranger who rode into town yesterday. The man introduced himself as John Smith, that makes him the third in Snake's Rock, and went about talking. Judd here says he has never seen the likes of it. This Mr. Smith talks and talks and talks and the men sit there dazed and listen. Sometimes the words he says make no sense at all, says Judd. Other times, Mr. Smith talks about downright frightening things that make a man's skin crawl, and everyone sits and listens. Sheriff Tate would normally investigate, but he is one of the men in the saloon. I suppose I will pay a visit this evening and see for myself what is keeping the men from working. A letter from Betsy to her sister in Missouri, June 30, 1866. Dear Susan, I know I just wrote you, but I have a most disturbing update to my story of the stranger. This morning, my youngest pupil, little Walter Sal, who is only 6, told me a tale of his meeting with the man, who I have come to know calls himself Mr. Smith. Walter went to do chores for old Widow Klein on his way to school this morning, and lo and behold, Mr. Smith was there. Strange candles were lit and Walter says Widow Klein was bowing and chanting to Mr. Smith, who was standing in a ring of dust. As Walter stared, Mr. Smith's eyes found him and gave him a look of the coldest hatred. To Walter I laughed this off as his imagination, but the lad is quite shaken. Before he left, he drew the ring he claims to have seen the stranger standing in on the chalkboard. The ring was the shape of a pentagram. Thank goodness me and him were the only ones in the room at the time. After this, he went off to play with his friends. I am frightened, dear sister. Pray for me. Betsy. Diary of Daniel Chester, Mayor of Snake's Rock City, June 30, 1866. I have seen the light. My Lord John Smith, though I now know that is not his true name, spoke to me. He spoke to me. I have seen. I can barely write these words from the joy inside. Now that I know, I have seen past the borders of this pitiful town, in the pitiful United States of America. No country on the earth could compare to the one my liege will establish, and I, his right-hand man. I killed Judd last night. It was in service to my liege and I have no sorrow. Though John Smith spoke to Judd as he did me, Judd's eyes did not open. Judd had the misfortune of some sort of immunity to the powerful words. Death was the only fate for him. We must bide our time, Lord Smith says, before we proclaim this kingdom to all. We must weed out all who cannot see, as Judd did not. Soon we will know who stands with us, and who must die. Diary of Betsy Conus. July 1, 1866. My letters to Susan will never arrive. Walter's father Adam told me he has seen the postman burning all outbound mail. No help will come for me. I know this town needs help, because I met this Mr. Smith this morning. He knocked right on my door. He had a soft look about him, not one would expect from a man on this side of the Mississippi. His eyes were mesmerizing. Then he told me to bow. I asked him why, and he repeated the command. When I did not obey, nor even respond in any way, he merely shut the door. When I looked out the window, I saw him speaking with Mayor Chester. They briefly looked my way, then Mayor Chester wrote something in a little book. Now men are outside my house, I cannot leave. Who is this cursed Mr. Smith? How, in a few days, does he command nearly everyone? What has become of the folks of this town? What shall become of me? Diary of Daniel Chester, follower of His Highness, July 4, 1866. Final entry. 2 days ago, all who could not see the light were destroyed. We burned them in the church. We bound them to the pews, and burned the building to the ground. Among the executed were Adam Sally and his wretched little boy, Deputy Burgess, Shep Johnson, our town drunk, Parson Lewis, and the school marm Miss Betsy. All received their just due. I would gladly have lit the fire myself, but that honor went to our saloon keeper, Tom, another one of John Smith's favorites. Someone must have escaped before then though, for word has it the military is coming, having heard rumors of rebellion. They think us a remainder of the Confederacy. Fools! They can never know our cause is greater than any created by man. Lord Smith has gone over the plan with me. When they come, and they will, I, along with Sheriff Tate, will assist our liege in his escape. We will then take cover behind the barricades, we are building them now, and fight to the last man, woman, and child. In fact, none of us shall be allowed to survive. Any of us taken captive will end ourselves. I now know Snake's Rock was never the end, it was merely a trial. Mr. Smith is thousands of years old, and he will live thousands more. One day, he will use his eyes and his voice to take over far greater places than this small town in the American West. May that day come swiftly. I have no use for further writing, for all my time must now be spent preparing for our appointed work. I will carry it out dutifully, as will all who remain in Snake's Rock City. Jillian Bernstein just lost her grandfather a few days ago. She was 18, but very attached to her 85-year-old grandfather. Heartbroken and depressed, she kept pondering about the wonderful times they spent together. Her grandfather was a Jewish man, and a survivor of the horrific Nazi era after the Second World War. He told her vivid narrations of the war, the sufferings of the Jews at the hands of the Germans, and how he escaped the concentration camp as his father's friend was a German soldier. "You'd not have been born today, Jillian, if I was murdered at the concentration camp," said old Mr. Rick Bernstein jokingly. A retired engineer and a widower at a young age, Mr. Bernstein had made a fortune at stocks. He owned a big 3-floor Victorian house in the countryside. Who always wished his son's family live with him, and they did. Jillian's parents were doctors and extremely busy with career, and Jillian was an only child under the sole responsibility of her grandfather. She was brought up, taken to school, swimming lessons, music lessons, even dance parties, mainly by her grandfather, whom she considered her hero. She got to see much less of her parents, and they denied for lunches or dinners, especially during festivals. However, they were one happy little family, where the little girl grew up to be her grandfather's princess, until her graduation and time came for her to leave home for college. By then, Mr. Bernstein had grown old and developed liver cancer. He knew he didn't have much time to live, so he tried to spend maximum time with Jillian, whom he adored the most in the world. He would cheer up his depressed granddaughter, his son and daughter-in-law, giving valuable advice and suggestions. He was under constant treatment and monitoring under the care of the best doctors in the area, so he could participate actively in his granddaughter's graduation ceremony, days after which she was to leave for college. His Jillian was going to Yale University, a renowned Ivy League school in Connecticut, to study biomedical engineering. He was a really proud old man. Jillian left home with a heavy heart, promising to call her grandfather every day, and speak to her parents regularly. In the first few days of orientation, she found it difficult to concentrate. A few months went by fine. She made new friends and began enjoying her new classes. She used to call home every day to speak to everyone. But one day she found the phones ringing and nobody picked up, even the cell phones. That was very weird. This continued for another day. When her mom called her back, "Grandpa wants to see you, Jillian." Jillian drove into her hometown the next evening, and stood in front of her house, totally dark as if nobody was home. She was sure Grandpa must have been hospitalized, and everyone was there with him as well. She was just about to turn around and move towards her car. She saw a light turn on at her grandpa's room. Oh well, so he's in. She eagerly entered the house. Grandpa might have opened the door knowing that Jillian will be arriving soon. He knew she could never ignore his call. The house looked desolate and dark. Her parents, as usual, were not home. There was a long and dark corridor leading to her grandpa's room at the other end. It was almost late evening, and winter, so it was pretty dark. There was always insufficient lights in this part of the house. Grandpa couldn't tolerate bright lights. She worked her way through the dark, and suddenly felt someone standing in front of his room. It was not the old man. It was a short young lady with long curly hair. Even before the astonished Jillian could ask who she was, the young lady turned her face to her and laughed the most horrendous laughter she ever heard of. Loud and eerie, not like a human being. The world turned dark in front of her eyes and she fainted. Jillian woke up, with a gentle touch on her forehead. It was her grandpa's touch. She knew it forever since she was little. She opened her eyes, her night suit drenched with sweat, and she was in her hostile bed. Her house, the dark entrance, Grandpa's dimly lit room had vanished right from in front of her eyes. She kept wondering about what had just happened, or was it a mere nightmare? Who was the young lady with curly hair, standing in front of her grandfather's room? She has never seen her before. Her eerie laughter sent shivers down her spine. As she was pondering over her dream, she looked at the clock. It was about 4:35 a.m. Suddenly the phone rang. It was her father, calling her with the news of her dear grandpa's death about 10 minutes ago. For some time before his death, the delirious old man kept talking to his deceased 23-year-old wife, Jillian's grandmother, asking her to wait for him at his door till they join hands after 60 years of her death. I, like many of us were as kids, used to be afraid of the dark. And if we're being honest, there are some of us that are still just a little afraid, including myself, and for good reason. The dark embodies one of our deepest fears, the unknown. Imagination is our worst enemy when surrounded by darkness. Anyway, the point is that when I was young I was scared of the dark, and I was especially scared of going outside at night. First, let me say that when I was a kid I had some great parents. They weren't perfect, but they did a good job of making sure I felt safe and loved. Part of this meant that I wasn't allowed to watch any horror movies. Looking back now I'm grateful for this, but at the time I guess I was just a tiny bit resentful because I had some weird dreams. I was probably 6 or 7 when I first dreamt of a creature that I called the head copper. In the dream my younger sister and I were playing on the swing set we used to have in our front yard. It was twilight, or maybe dawn. I couldn't tell because the sky was a thick gray, but in any case it was light enough to see fairly well. As we slid down the red plastic slide attached to the swing set, a feeling like someone was watching us quickly came over me. At once I knew it was the head copper and I wanted my sister to go back inside with me. I can't remember if he actually came after us or not, but I do remember that I instantly knew exactly what he looked like and exactly what he would do to us if he caught us. Even now, at 19, I still clearly remember what he looked like. As I can recall, the head copper very closely resembled the troll dolls that were very popular in the 60s and on and off again through the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now that I'm older, I think that I may have imagined him like that because there was a very creepy troll doll in my great-grandparents' garage for the longest time. I think it sat on the top shelf of a tool case that was mostly overflowing with cans of spray paint. It always gave me chills when I passed by it on my way to the backyard. Like the doll, the head copper sported wild blue hair that stood straight up and had a blue gem wedged in his belly button. He stood at about 3 feet tall and was thick and chubby like the doll. His eyes always glinted with excitement. Now this is where it gets really weird. Keep in mind that I had never seen a horror movie, yet this next part sounds like it could be straight out of one. The head copper carried around a chainsaw that he used to chop people's heads off. Hence the name. It may sound cliché to you, but at the time I had no clue that chainsaws were so common a trope. Anyway, so after he chopped off your head he would take it home, which just happened to be the darkest, scariest side of my house, and boil it in a large cauldron of acid. After that he would place your bare skull on a shelf along with the rest of his collection. At the time of the dream I knew he already had almost an entire shelf full of these skulls. I woke up from the dream scared, and probably went and woke up my parents to comfort me. This was my first dream, and, strangely enough, it has never recurred. I recall it now from the vivid memory I have of it, but I've never once dreamed it twice. For this reason, I count the other dream I'm about to recall to you as a completely separate, but related dream. The second dream happened not long after the first. Like the first dream, it has never recurred, and I'm confident that it never will. In the second dream I was at my great-grandparents' house. I stood in the front yard for reasons I can't recall and I believe I was waiting for someone. The sky was black, covered in stars, and completely moonless. The streetlights were on, but they weren't bright, and lights shone through the windows of the houses on the street. My great-grandparents live at the end of a street that intersects into a larger street, and on the other side of this intersecting street there is a church. There is a single white basketball hoop next to the church and it happened to be placed under a single street lamp. The effect was quite creepy and as a kid I always hated looking directly at it. Anyway, as I stood looking over this scene, the same gut feeling that had overcome me in the first dream returned and I knew that the head copper was coming for me. Although my great-grandparents' house is kinda far from my house, I knew this would not be a problem for him. Nothing happened, though, and I waited in fear. I woke up afraid again, but decided to keep this one to myself this time, at least for a while. I'm both relieved and disappointed that I have nothing more to tell you. I've probably recounted this to as many of my friends and family as will listen, but I've always felt they never understood the true terror I felt going out at night as a kid. I would have rather played Bloody Mary, which still terrifies me to this day, than have gone outside and let the head copper get me. Even now I sometimes unlock my car door just a little faster and hop in my car just a little too carelessly as I suppress a panicky feeling bubbling up my throat. Sometime in July of 2008, this journal was found on a game trail somewhere in northern Michigan, seemingly belonging to a man named Donovan Greig, who went missing 2 months prior in Sheboygan, Michigan. Origins are mostly unknown. Some contents may be disturbing to some readers. Reader discretion is advised. Journal entry 9:45 p.m. the 2nd of May, 2008. I found something in the alleyway behind the bar in which I work. It was sitting on one of the garbage cans when I went out to have a smoke. It didn't intrigue me at first, but as I stood out there it started to. After I finished my cigarette I picked it up. It was a map of some sort, written on old, wrinkled paper. It looks like an old pirate map. I don't know quite what it is at the moment, but I'll look into it. Journal entry 11:40 a.m. 4th of May, 2008. I completely forgot about that map until a few hours ago. I had left it in my car for the past few days, so I went and got it. Upon further inspection, I realized the map started from an old lake in my area. I don't know quite where it leads, but I hope it leads to something valuable. Journal entry 7:06 p.m. 11th of May, 2008. I finally got the next few days off of work, and I'm going to use them to see where this map goes. Journal entry 5:32 a.m. 12th of May, 2008. I got a knapsack with a sleeping tarp, a bottle of water, more granola bars than I know what to do with, a flashlight, and a Bowie knife. I'm on my way to the lake now. It's about an hour away from my house. I can't wait to start. Journal entry 6:54 a.m. 12th of May, 2008. I finally got to the lake. Traffic was a bitch. This early, too. But I can at least get started. Journal entry 12th of May, 2008 9:01 a.m. I've been following this map for a couple of hours now. It's leading me down some sort of game trail. I keep passing these trees with the letter N carved into them, and an arrow pointing in the way of which the map is leading me. This thing now has my attention. Journal entry 12:25 p.m. 12th of May, 2008. I'm passing these signs, now. They're reading things like caution and beware of creatures. I didn't know there were any dangerous animals out here. I'll keep my knife close, just in case I run into a bear or something. Journal entry 1:34 p.m. 12th of May, 2008. These signs are getting a little more menacing. They're saying things like turn back and stay out. What the hell? I keep thinking I should, but something keeps telling me to keep going. What should I do? You know what, I'll flip a coin. Heads I turn back, tails I keep going. Tails, okay, then. Onward. Journal entry 3:26 p.m. 12th of May, 2008. I finally came across something other than trees and creepy signs. It looks like some old town, but it seems to be abandoned. Its front gate reads Noshaka Village. I've never heard of this place. The map ends here. Maybe whoever made this map wants me to look for whatever is hidden here. Touché, map. Touché. Journal entry 7:09 p.m. 12th of May, 2008. I've looked these houses high and low and I've come up with nothing. Wait. There's a door over there. I don't remember seeing that. Well, onwards. Journal entry 12:56 a.m. 13th of May, 2008. I've been stuck in here for hours. I should have never followed the fucking map. Okay, I'd better fill you in. Remember that door? Well, I went in. It led right down to a basement, and it was pitch black. I turned on my flashlight, and I came across some sort of ritual site. There was a mummified human corpse in the middle. The skulls of animals surrounded it, and they were filled with beeswax and had the letter N written in blood on the cranium. I decided I probably shouldn't be in there, and when I went to leave I heard something behind me. When I looked, the mummy was starting to get up. It was all jerky and, now that I think about it, reminded me of Gollum by the way it moved. I don't think it could see me, because its eyes so dry they disintegrated when it stood. But it sniffed the air, and screeched at me. I hightailed out of there faster than I have ever ran before. However, I dropped the Bowie like an idiot. I just kept running, and when I got to the gate it was closed. And locked. I looked behind me, and saw that more mummies were coming in my direction. Where the hell did they come from? That doesn't matter. I eventually locked myself in a storage shed or something. I can hear them at the door now. They keep scratching on it, and moaning. It's enough to drive any man mad. Maybe I can escape through one of the windows. Journal entry 3:29 a.m. 13th of May, 2008. I shouldn't have tried that. When I jumped out the window a mummy got me by the leg and bit me. I'm pretty sure it severed a tendon. I managed to climb over the fence with one leg. I don't even know how I did. I just did. I've been dragging myself along the path for about 3 hours, but I doubt I'll get out of here alive. I've lost a lot of blood, and I'm still bleeding. I keep hearing something move about the woods around me. It could be a hungry scavenger, like a coyote, or it could be no. I just have to keep going. If anybody find this, tell Krista I love her. The journal ends here. The town was never found, and neither was Donovan. It is unknown if he survived, but judging by the blood stains on the pages he most likely didn't. Many search parties were sent out to find him, but none have found his body. If you have any information on this, please contact the police. I took off my jacket and hung it on the coat hanger in the closet. The hood slipped and fell onto the floor, and I sighed and picked it back up. After placing it securely on the hook on the right, I turned and looked in the mirror on the opposite wall. I desperately needed to shave. Later, I told myself. My mouth opened as I yawned, and I struggled to keep my eyes open. Since I didn't feel like climbing the stairs to my bedroom, I flopped onto the couch in my living room. The gas fire on my left warmed me up, which felt nice after being outside in the cold late autumn air. A thin layer of snow had covered the ground during the previous night. I covered myself in a blanket. I took off the armrest and extended my arm to grab the remote. I pushed in the power button and was greeted by the words "breaking news" covering the screen. 57 children disappeared from their homes tonight, all at the same time, and no clues were left behind at the scene. Just moments ago, a search helicopter spotted them in a field just off the main road. At this time, they are all completely unresponsive, even after being moved. By the time the newscaster finished, I had already fallen asleep. I had no idea the extent to which that event would alter the course of my life. I barely even remembered that report the next morning. As if it was going to be a normal day, I got up off the couch, ate a bowl of oatmeal, and got ready for another day of work. I hopped in the car and made my frustrating way through the early morning traffic. After parking in a space close to the hospital doors, I walked briskly inside. "Good morning, Jen," I said to the receptionist. "Hello, Dr. Jenkins," she replied. Something about her seemed wrong. "Is everything alright?" I asked of her. "Not really. We have 57 new patients here, doctor." 57? I exclaimed. "All today? For a hospital as small as ours, that was quite a lot." Then I remembered the news report from last night and made the numeric connection. "The kids," I realized. "I assume you heard about it?" "Yeah, on the news." I fell asleep while she was talking. "Could you give me the full story?" She nodded. "All these kids just vanished out of their homes last night. Just gone. No one could even guess what had happened. Some people formed a search party and found them almost right away in some field. They wouldn't talk to nobody, not even their own parents. No one knew what to do. And then one of those kids just kneels on the ground and throws up. Then another one does it, and then another one. And soon all of them are puking all over the place, and it took almost 5 minutes for them to stop. And then they all just passed out. The search people took them here, 'cause they're obviously sick. And now we gotta take care of them. We gotta feed them, clean up after them, and make sure they're healthy and stuff. We shake them and tell them to get up, but they won't. And the whole time they're all mumbling about miracles and enlightenment in their sleep." Being a strong atheist, I gave her a quizzical look. "How old are they?" "All between 6 and 12. And they're talking about miracles and enlightenment?" "Yep. Me, I think God did this. He has a purpose for these kids." "Well, I don't." She glared at me. "Just take care of them." So I did. I ran up and down on the 3 floors they all occupied, checking vital signs and cleaning up waste. Jen was right. Every time I was close enough, I could hear them say something about how they had been enlightened, and that some miracle had happened in that field. I didn't think about that. I had a lot of work to do. 3 hours later I picked up the container of applesauce and gently poured it into the kid's mouth. His parents were sitting in the corner of the room, one sleeping and the other looking out the window. I was tipping his head back so he would swallow the sauce when suddenly he gasped and spit it all out. He began coughing for an unhealthy amount of time and then he finally opened his eyes while I called for a nurse. "Whoa," he said. His parents rushed over to his side. "Are you okay? We were so worried about you." I ran out to find the nearest nurse. "Hey!" I yelled. "He's awake. Someone get over here." A nurse poked her head out of a door a ways down the hall. "You! Come here, he's talking." She ran out and shut the door behind her. "Who's talking?" "One of the kids." I rushed back inside. His vitals were normal except for a slightly elevated heartbeat, but that was understandable considering the circumstances. His parents were still overwhelming him with questions. He blinked rapidly and looked around the room. "I'm fine," he told them. "Do you remember anything?" asked the father. "A little," he replied. The nurse came into the room and checked the monitor. "Everything's normal," she said in surprise. "I know," I said back. "Let's give them some privacy." I left the room and shut the door after she followed me out. She started to say something, but then we began to hear a cough from behind the door. I reopened it to see the kid kneeling on the ground, coughing horribly. I tried to get a trash can over to him, but by the time I located one it was too late. He vomited all over the tile floor, and everyone backed up to avoid being caught in the spread of the puddle of bile. I looked at the nurse. "Can you clean the tub? I'm going to get some help." She frowned. "Okay." I rushed out of the room, leaving her with the terrified parents. Deciding that the elevator would take too long, I sprinted down the stairs two at a time. Once I was at the bottom of the stairs, I rushed down the hallway and came to a sliding stop in the lobby. "Someone get up here." I ordered. No one in particular. "One of them's awake." 7 hours later the inside of my house was a sight for sore eyes. I strongly considered going to sleep right then, even though it was only 6 o'clock. Instead, I had a quick bowl of canned macaroni and cheese and turned on the TV. The screen displayed the kid that had woken up while I was at the hospital. He was the only one awake, at least as far as I knew. "The light knows," he was saying. "What does it know?" asked a confused reporter. "Everything." The boy shrugged, like he didn't know what the everything that it knew was. "What is the light?" "Everything." I shut off the TV. Now I wouldn't be able to sleep. That was some creepy stuff. Whatever was happening with those kids, I didn't want to know. I stood up and stretched. After brief contemplation on the day's events, I went upstairs and climbed into my gigantic bed. I don't know how long I slept. I also don't know what woke me up, or why I had the sudden urge to go outside. Without getting dressed, I stood up and trudged out the sliding glass doors. Something unidentifiable made a loud splash as it fell into the pool that I never used. I didn't go over to investigate as I would have on any other day. Instead I kept moving slowly forward as if I were sleepwalking, or maybe in a trance. Never for a moment did I question what I was doing. When I finally got back in control of my actions, I was standing in the center of my yard, surrounded by a crowd of children. I realized that these must be the 57 that had vanished from their homes. Now they had vanished from the hospital. They were all facing the same way I was. None of them moved a muscle. It didn't seem like they were even breathing. I approached a girl standing right next to me and waved my hand in front of her face. There was no reaction. Why were they all in my yard? Who, or what, had brought them here? How did they get here without anyone noticing? These were questions to which I had no answer. I walked forward towards the front of the crowd, making sure not to bump into any of them. It wasn't that hard, since they were spaced out rather sparsely, about one every 5 feet. Something moving in the sky caught my attention. It seemed like a star at first, as it was the same color and size. But that size began to change as it got closer. In just a second it got at least twice as large, and moments later it seemed to be only 20 feet above the grass, and I had to put my hand in front of my face because the light was so blinding. It made no noise, but the grass below it bent away, as if it were producing some strong wind that I couldn't feel. It wasn't that far away, and it was so huge that it made me feel small and insignificant, but I felt happy at the same time. I didn't feel the slightest bit of fear, either. One of the kids in front of me wobbled back and forth just enough for me to notice. I made my way over to him, and just before I reached him he fell on his face without a sound. I rushed to his side and put my hand on his neck. I breathed a great sigh of relief. He still had a pulse. Suddenly a strong gust of wind burst out of the orb of light, knocking me onto my back and releasing what sounded like a sonic boom. The wind didn't stop, and neither did the sound. Part of me wanted to shield my eyes from the blinding light, and another wanted to block my ears from the deafening noise. I struggled to get back up as blades of grass were uprooted from their positions and blown away from the light. The kids weren't affected at all by the wind, but they all started falling forward, towards the source of the gale. How was that possible? The wind intensified and I could no longer move. The gusts kept me on the ground and stopped me from shielding my eyes. I shut them, but it still felt blinding. It seemed to blow the air out of my lungs, and at that moment I knew I was going to suffocate. There was no air anywhere near here. The light had blown it all away, but somehow something was still blowing away from it. Even when I knew I was going to die, I still wasn't scared. Something about the light still made me happy. And then the wind stopped. The sound ceased. Air rushed back into my lungs and I bolted onto my feet. I gazed up at the light and then it was gone too. The blinding light went away, and for the first time in my life I could truly see. I live in rural Utah, therefore I have no choice but to love being outside. I go hiking several times a week. I used to go alone until an incident with a mountain lion, so now I take my dog, a 95-pound yellow lab named Juno. It was mid-April and so it was finally starting to warm up. By warm up I mean it was around 60 degrees. So, I had been hiking a lot more frequently. I had traded my dad's vehicles and so I had his Chevy truck for the day. I loaded up Juno and headed up the mountain. I have a usual spot where I park at a campground by the river and head up a trail where I can then choose which area I want to climb up. But, on this day I stopped at a different spot on impulse. I parked, grabbed my backpack, and Juno and we headed out. We had no choice but to cross a river within minutes of starting, but neither of us seemed to mind. We then started climbing up the rather large rocky hillside and I started noticing things that I had never known were in this area before. There were lots of caves, Native American ruins, and petroglyphs. I knew of other areas in this region that had all of this, but I never knew they were in this specific spot before. I took pictures of most of it and admired it all, but then I continued on before glancing over and noticing a set of petroglyphs that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It was kind of off by itself and was of some sort of figure that looked a little more off than what the others generally look like. I brushed it off and continued up the hillside. After probably 30-40 minutes of strenuous hiking, Juno and I reached the top. It was stunning, but it didn't give me the same rush that I normally get when I reach the top after a hard climb. I walked all over the smooth rocky top and admired the view of the river and canyon down below. I started to head to the other side of the ledge when I noticed a large hole in the ground in the rock. I looked down inside and there was what almost looked like a ladder made out of rock heading into a cave that overlooked what I was already looking at. I thought nothing of it and actually started to head down into it when Juno started barking at me. I stared at him and he stared back at me for a second, and then I tried to continue, but once again he started to bark, this time more frantically. I stepped away from the cave and turned around quickly, noticing something that I had basically walked past the first time. Men's clothing thrown about under a small tree. Most of it was boxers. There was also a Pepsi can, several water bottles, and band-aids. I started to feel really airy and creepy scenarios started to play out in my head. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a hatchet that was obviously normally used for firewood and started glancing all around me. I looked up into the ledges above me and the rocks around me, but I didn't notice anything else strange. I stood there a moment longer trying to come up with something logical when I glanced back towards the cave entrance. Chills ran down my spine. What was in there? I turned around to start to leave when I thought I heard someone talking. I spun back around, but I didn't see anyone or anything. I started heading off of the hillside in a quicker and much more dangerous manner than on the way up with the hatchet hanging from my teeth. I was basically throwing myself off of steep drop-offs and relying solely on my upper body strength to catch myself before falling. I made it to the bottom in less than 10 minutes with Juno in tow. He usually runs out in front of me and finds routes more suitable for dogs, but this time he followed directly behind me, basically throwing himself off of stuff just like me. We ran through the river quickly, not even looking for a spot where the current was slower, and Juno didn't stop to play in the water like he normally does. He is a lab after all. I threw both of us into the truck and instead of driving straight off of the mountain, I drove up a few yards so that I was exactly parallel to the cave, and I strained really hard to see what was inside, but no such luck. I tore my dad's truck apart looking for binoculars but found none. I settled for the next best thing and grabbed a shotgun off of the gun rack and held it up to look through the scope. At first I saw nothing, but then I saw it. Hidden towards the back of the cave. A human-shaped figure with almost human-like characteristics, but not quite.